For the AI thing, that's super interesting. I mean, I work for a tech company, and so I'd say a good 3/4 of the tech companies that we've recently started have an AI component to them, although AI is not as of a real thing as people think it is in their imaginations. Like, it's more still really at the machine learning, deep learning stages. AI is the way that people envision AI who don't have a tech background isn't really where it's at now. I don't think people need to be too concerned about robots taking over the world in any time. Most especially because, like you said, the AI we are machine learning, and AI is only as good as the how we train it. And so there's this woman I know, she's has a chatbot company in California, and they've done a pretty massive study of how people treat chatbots. And so all the communication that you have with the chatbot then teaches the chatbot, right? So as we use it, it learns. The problem is that most of the time we are abusing chatbots. We are abusing Siri, and so it the sheer amount of abuse that we um, display to our digital counterparts, I guess you could call them, is a disturbing reflection of humanity, in fact. So, we'd like to think that we are civilized and, respectable, nice people, but the data doesn't show that. So that's a bit of a concern, just normal, daily behaviors, never mind trying to teach humor and other types of things to machine learning. Is there's a lot of parts of the human that will be very difficult to train.
Okay. So in my TEDx talk, also I talked about the rules and the paradigms that we program into artificial intelligence. I personally compare it to like the Ten Commandments. We humans, I usually say, we are coined by our religions, even if we are not religious, because we grow up in societies that a culture is basically a continuation of a process, a societal process over a certain amount of time. And a few cultures are a few thousand years old, a few cultures are maybe a few hundred years old. And usually the rules and the paradigms were always defined by religion. So even if I'm not a religious person, even if I'm an atheist, still I'm coined by my society that I've grown up with. So with this background, I always say the rules and the paradigms that we program into the AI or train AI with is basically what the result of artificial intelligence is. Do you see it? Is basically what you said, just like what I'm reflecting now, or
It
would
is.
you
I
see it
mean,
in a different way?
you're right. It's the. I mean, if you even look at just Google searches and how people, so anything that gets programmed is programmed from a biased point of view. And so if for the longest time the people who were doing the programming were white Christian males, and so that those systems got set up to reflect, when you make a connection, when I say doctor, you think white man. When you say nurse, you think white woman, and so there's teacher, all these, because it's all about connections, right? So they have to keep making all these words connect to one another in the way that they think that people think, so that when you type in something, you get back the results that you're looking for. And it's the same for everything. So all of the way that all the data gets input and the way that things get programmed are from a biased point of view. And it's not from malice. That's just how it is. And this will shift when now we're doing, there's a lot of programs that, getting done in China or getting done in India, and it's the same thing. So they will have their biases that gets put into the system. and it will all reflect. And so it's true that whatever you're sort of brought up with in your belief systems will this shows up in data is not neutral. There is no neutral machine learning. Like they can try their best, but and having diverse teams helps tremendously if you can get that from the beginning. But already a lot of the systems are already built with the bias, and so there's really no such thing as neutral anyway.
Okay. And do you believe that it would make a difference for the future also? I mean, there is these scenarios that you also referred to before, that artificial intelligence will take over, that people think that we are maybe near to the stage, and so on and so forth. Do you personally think that how we program artificial intelligence today, tomorrow, will also have an effect how artificial intelligence, if it ever reaches the point of superintelligence, singularity, however you might want to call it, if that will make a difference, how we basically which paradigms, which rules, which dogmas we program into them, or do you think it won't
I mean,
make no
that's a big
difference at all?
that's a tough one, because if you just look at the United Nations, so this is supposed to be a group of nations coming together to try to agree on certain things, but getting even any type of declarations or ratified throughout, because different people have different perspectives of what they think are good and bad things and right and wrong and the thing to do, not to do. And so what will happen is the people who say have power or money will end up being the creators of the system. There's also this saying, it's the victors who write history. And so it will be those systems that get built with those beliefs in them, because those were the people who had access to do it, had the money to do it. They won't reflect all humans at all times, and I'm not even sure that that would be a good idea anyways. It's I I mean, maybe I'm both an idealist and a bit of a, I don't know what to call it. I mean, so I do believe in constructivism, where we are creating our own systems. Nothing is really set, but at the same time, we think we're under the illusion that we are a civilized society, and really what keeps us glued together and acting appropriately is a mix of religion and law. Because if we didn't have those two systems set up, it would just result back to chaos and very animalistic. I mean, you could just look throughout history. Whenever those two things break down, and people just start getting violent and going crazy, and so it's in us, and I think it's, if we can come to terms and admit that when we're creating these types of systems, then we can be more careful about trying to build systems that reflect some type of morality and ethics in them, in the hope, if you can program that in. I mean, you can't deprogram the animal in us, but maybe we can program in some higher moral ethical ground. But it would need to be super intentional, because if they don't do that and they just sort of make a reflection of us without admitting all of our downfalls, then what you will get is a very nasty it'll be a nasty world. I think human beings aren't all that nice all the time, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it is said, I don't know how it is exactly termed, but I think in the Bible it says God has created men and women in his or her own image. So this is basically what's happening with artificial intelligence, in a way.
In a way.
So
Yeah.
I wonder, from your perspective, who do you think should decide how we go forth in this respect? Like how we program artificial intelligence, how a long-term perspective of developing artificial intelligence should be?
Yeah, another big question. It's a bit of a conundrum because if one believed in democracy in in its best form, that actually is nowhere implemented. So democracy in an ideal version doesn't exist. But if it could, it would be better to be able to survey more people for input into those types of decisions. Unfortunately, there's not enough people who spend enough time educating themselves on all the aspects for what it would take in order to build an ethical and really great system of AI or singularity or what have you, and so it's you cannot actually rely on, say, the general public or the masses to make good decisions based on that, and not because they're bad, but just because everybody doesn't have enough information to make an informed decision. I would say that's the problem with democracy as a whole. People who vote don't actually make informed decisions for the most part, and so this is the issue. So then what ends up happening is people who do have the money and the knowledge are ultimately the ones who end up making those decisions. And so it again, it boils down to who's got the power to do it, and who has the education to do it, and that's how it'll go. So I don't know who those people will be ultimately, but anyone who's you have to be in this sphere. Like, it's one who doesn't understand deep learning and machine learning and data and computer science and how all of these things really work. And I am not that person either. I cannot claim these are. I absorb a lot of information, but I can't program myself. But so I wouldn't be one who could make an informed decision. I can give opinions like, yes, please make them moral, but beyond that, how does one do that? I have no idea. And so it's those people that will ultimately. There's no other way. You can't ask people how to do things that they don't know how to do it.
Yes. Still, I wonder, like, in an ideal world, from your perspective, who would make the decision? Less of who's making those decisions now, but from your perspective, with your background, and you have an eclectic background, and perhaps have a very different view on reality and the importance of what needs to happen in the future than people who don't have this type of broad background and are more experts in one particular field. But from your personal perspective, in an ideal world, who should make the decisions how it goes forth with artificial intelligence and basically the future of humanity, if you want to say?
Well, I mean, it'll sound a bit elitist, but I do think that you need a mix of backgrounds and a mix of people who think about ethics and people who think about philosophy and people who are well read and people who are, you don't necessarily have to have a PhD, but people who understand and think about humanity. Like, you have to be interested in forwarding humanity and sort of in that sphere. So if you want to just call them, like, say, philosophers, not classical philosophers, but just people who philosophize and who think about these big things. So big thinkers, plus the people who actually can execute. So you need to have people who have grand visions, and can actually together collaborate and envision what a world could be like. And not everybody can do that. And then you also need groups of people who actually can execute on that. And when you are having those types of discussions with people, then you know what can be done and what can be done. As far as people who are just funding the project, they should have no decision making unless they are one of these two groups. Shouldn't be anybody political unless you fall into one of these two groups. Like it needs to be, visionaries and experts, a mix from everywhere. It doesn't really matter what country you're from or what religion you're from. If you fall into those two camps, like I can't think of anybody else who would be able to do that well. When you're thinking about, you have to sort of have a humanities point of view, understanding all the different sociological, anthropological, policy, cultural, like you have to be able to think about all of these things, sort of all the impacts. Yeah. I don't know what group you could call these. I have no idea how you would fix the criteria, but yeah, it's big thinkers basically.